Hello and welcome to On Point. This episode features a conversation with Rodney Manzo, founder and CEO of Anvyl, a technology platform that brings intelligent and connected supply chains to customers worldwide. Rodney has a demonstrated history of launching products around the world. Prior to starting Anvyl, Rodney was a senior director of supply chain at Harry's and a global supply manager at Apple. He also served in the United States Army as a combat engineer during tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Rodney received his bachelor's degree in management and systems engineering from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and his master's in business administration, focused in finance and operations, from Columbia Business School. In this episode of On Point, Rodney Manzo discusses his career as a combat engineer in the Army, the effect that maintaining a rigorous daily routine can have on consistency, how mentors are extremely important while in the military and throughout your career, and the trials, tribulations, and ultimate successes related to starting his own supply chain company. Now, please enjoy this interview between Rodney Manzo and your hosts Tim Shaw and Lance Dietz.
Welcome to On Point. I'm your host, Tim Shaw, West Point class of 2004.
And I'm Lance Dietz, class of 2008.
And today we're joined by Rodney Manzo, a fellow class of 2004 for Country and Core. Rodney, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Lance and Tim. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's get into our first segment, AAR, or for our non-military listeners, After Action Review. In this segment, we'd like to touch on specifically what other veterans can learn from you, your process, and your journey. To start off with, Rodney, could you please talk about your decision to attend West Point?
Yeah, I think a lot of people could resonate with this. I didn't have any family in the military. I was like the first one to go or to even think about it. And it was just happenstance. My junior year, I started running track. I thought I was going to go to school and play basketball my entire life. What I realized, I wasn't good at basketball, but I could jump really high. I happened to be at West Point, and I was beating everybody at West Point at the time, whatever that they were doing. So immediately the coaches started recruiting me, and it just stuck. And I was like, you know what? I want to go to West Point. The funny thing is, when I started our day, the coaches weren't really sure if I was even going to be there. So they were like just looking for me to make sure I actually attended. But it was just luck. There was like nothing outside of a beautiful campus, great program, great history. It was just blind luck. And then I fell in love with West Point and then the military.
So I ran into you probably on our day. I will admit I was the worst cadet during Beast Barracks, the worst, and you know that. And so there's no denying that. I remember you as an amazing cadet all throughout everything Beast Barracks and beyond. What were your events in track and field?
I appreciate you saying that. You were not a bad cadet. I was a generalist. So I did a lot of multi-events. I did heptathlon, pentathlon, and decathlon. But I really was focused on hurdles and the jumps. I was just in between everything. I was not really fast. I was not really strong, but I was okay in a lot of different events, which naturally I went into those. So I was very fortunate, great career. I was able to captain my senior year, which I think was a great privilege. And there were so many just unbelievable athletes. One of our classmates, Jeff Weaver, Adam Burke, just truly world-class athletes that came out of our program.
And what type of cadet were you? I know, but I think it'd be helpful for our listeners to know.
I never walked an hour, if that's any indicator of anything. I'm sure listeners are West Pointers or not, but you walk an hour when you do something bad. I was very, very regimented, very focused, very by the book. When I was doing track, I was also like a company commander, first sergeant, things like that. So I was really ingrained into the cadet life. I really loved it. My friends make fun of me about that because whatever you call yourself, a slug or a core spotter or whatever it may be, they were like, you're the biggest core squad slug I know. It was funny, but I was a really focused cadet. I did love the academy and what it was. However, I'll say it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done going there. I don't think people realize how truly difficult West Point is, what a challenge it is. You could be the smartest person on the planet, most athletic. Doesn't matter, you're going to be tested. And it was tough, but I loved it.
How do you think your experience at West Point might be helping you in your current career or even in the Army and beyond?
I think there's a few things. The first is I like to get pushed, and I'm not comfortable with just the status quo, whether that's, running track, painful workouts, going through when I was a cadet, air assault school was, a little difficult, or ranger school, sapper school, whatever it may be, being deployed multiple times. The first is just pushing yourself and being comfortable with not being comfortable. The second is detail-oriented and very focused on the little things. That's been helpful like throughout, West Point, my career, throughout whatever company I've been at. And lastly, just like focusing on people. Like people are the most important asset you can have. I mentioned like my track team when you're in the Army and deployed with all the engineers I was with. And here as a company, we have 50 plus people at Anvyl. People are the number one priority for you. But those are the three things I think about constantly.
And what was your major at West Point?
Yeah. So what I tell people, I'm a weirdo because what I did academically and professionally really is one single thread. I was a systems engineer with business. Really, it's industrial engineer, study of supply chain, how to make things more efficient. When I was an engineer officer, I'm going a little bit more broad into the major, really two roles. Like I always say this, like kinetic and then non-kinetic. Like kinetic with jumping out of planes, blowing things up. And non, I was master airload planner, logistician, purchasing agent. I was buying, building, and moving things globally and continue to do that post-military life. But I was crazy to do the same thing in different modes and different means throughout my career. But short answer, I was a system industrial engineer and business major.
And let's fast forward to the Army. In the Army, you were a combat engineer with tours to Afghanistan and Iraq. What was that experience like?
I try to talk about this in a few ways with non-military people. Number one, it's intrinsically probably the best time I've ever had in my life. And I know that's really weird to say, but it's like a very few times when everyone just truly cares about each other and you're doing the same thing and focus on the same exact mission. You don't have that in like the business world. In the business world, people are focused on different things, right? You could be focused on your family. You could be focused on pay, your profession, a title. There, it's not that. All that stuff goes out the window and you're just focused on the same thing. The second thing that I tell people is like, I was seeing my impact on a daily basis. What I was doing is route clearance. So we'd go out and we'd be clearing routes over and over again, whether it was for the military, like the Army partners, or it was for even civilians. And what we could see is like we're removing mines and stuff from people dying from, which was at the time for us, like an EFP and other explosives were like the number one cause of death. So every day you saw an impact. And lastly, that brotherhood, sisterhood, it was just an unbelievable time. But as you can imagine, being deployed is always difficult. My second deployment, 15 months, you get 2 weeks off. You don't have a family. Now I do. I actually cannot imagine what it would be like with a family, which all my soldiers, not all, but a lot did. I don't know how they did it. Missing first birthdays, 10th birthdays. It's unbelievable. But overall, very challenging, but unbelievable experience that I tap into constantly.
In terms of your Army experience, how is it with the NCOs? What was that relationship like for you? And how did you manage that deployed and so on?
Yeah, there's all these things like listen to your NCOs and make sure you learn from them. And I think there's a lot of truth to it, where I think there's a lot of give and take. I was very fortunate to have some of the best in the Army. They're all like fast movers, like they've excelled throughout their careers. So having NCOs for me, it reminded me of a world where I was like going back to sports, so like basketball, where like you're a freshman and you have seniors on the team. They're teaching you truly how to play basketball or whatever sport. Like they're coaching, mentoring, you're listening. You could be better in aspects of them, right? You could be a better shooter or have other skill sets. And you weave those in, but they were supporting me to become, I would say, the man, the person, the officer that I was. Still keep in contact with my team. And it's been an unbelievable experience with that kind of bond between officers and NCOs.
Was there anything in particular you think that gave them confidence in you? Was it like a school that you had attended? Was it how you showed up in terms of being willing to listen, but had a set of confidence? Like, how did you establish that relationship with these fast movers?
Yeah, a few things. And this is not just NCOs, this is business and life. I was the first one in, last one to leave. So I'd be walking the walk, talking the talk. If they needed me, I was there and it didn't matter. I was there by means to actually show I cared. The second I was a sponge, I listened. And you have 2 ears, one mouth. So I was listening more than I was talking. And I was learning from them, their experiences. West Point is, a great time. It's 4 years. They had been in the Army for 15. It's very, very different. Those are like, I think, the biggies. I guess the other, I did go to Ranger School. I did go to Sapper School. I was airborne, air assault. Like I had patches. Like I could run like pretty fast. So it's not like they had to worry about me like with other things. I could care less about those things because if you're a truly bad person that doesn't listen, doesn't care, you could have a million patches. But it just helps you if you do the first two.
One more question I have before I pass it back to Tim. Ranger and Sapper School, which one in your mind was harder? And two, were you a sleepy or a hungry Ranger Sapper?
Such a good question. Ranger School I was very fortunate. So I had enlisted, I'm drawing a blank of his name. So he was enlisted SF medic. I also had another West Pointer there. And then I had another Ranger Bat. We all went straight through. I shouldn't say his name, but his name's the Oracle, one of our classmates. We caught up with him. He was there for like 8 months. So I was thinking that versus us going through. So what we would do is instead of sleeping, we'd be trading meals and doing different things. And we'd truly be joking because we were just a really tight bond in a good group. But I would say like I was never hungry. I know that's weird to say. And I'm sorry for everyone who went through Ranger School and was hungry. I get it and I understand it. It was more so sleepy, but we deferred sleep to kind of talk and trade food. Great question. I love that one. Everyone has such different experiences. I caught up with Dwayne Mantle actually when I was going in. I'm thinking of these stories. And Dwayne was telling me how painful it was before I started. He was just graduating. I can't remember, I don't want to call him out, but he did recycle, let's just say one time. And he was saying that. And I was like, what do I have ahead of me? So I was fortunate. In reverse, though, Sapper School, I think once you rip the Band-Aid off, it's like a kid now. Once you rip that Band-Aid off, you know what it's like. So in reverse, I went through Ranger School first, Sapper School second. I was there with a bunch of my guys. I think there was about 15 of us going through Sapper School. And for me, it was comical because it's half the time. It's just as intense, but they had no clue what was in store. So it was funny seeing how they were reacting to that environment versus like, you've been there, you've seen it. Not dissimilar to your first kid where you realize you're never going to sleep for the first like 3 months. And anyone who has a kid, it's true. If your kid sleeps, I give you a lot of respect, but mine woke up every hour to 2 hours. So you literally never slept.
Ronnie, you called yourself a generalist, but looking and knowing your career, you've been very good at everything. Track captain, leader as a cadet, and leader on the sports team. Good at kinetic, good at non-kinetic, all those schools, graduates of. So not sure if you really needed mentors, but did you have any mentors at West Point or the Army?
I think this is the biggest piece of feedback for anyone that's in the military, transitioning from the military, out of the military, is get mentors, get good, smart people, very experienced people around you. When I was at the military, I had zero. When I was transitioning, zero. I was so clueless, kind of like going into West Point, about like careers. I know now I'm like, banking, what is banking? Consulting, what would you do as a consultant? Like clueless. Where if you talk to someone, they'll tell you very quickly and efficiently what that is, and you're living through them. So from that mistake, like I definitely course corrected later in my professional life. Now there's a few. I have my entire board, and that's unbelievable. And on my board, I have people like Kevin Ryan, who's been an investor for, I'll say, his entire career. He's a godfather in New York City tech. He's like MongoDB is the most recent. Like his first one is DoubleClick that IPO'd and then was acquired by Google's runoff of DoubleClick. And then there's been dozens in between. And talking to Kevin, it's like, how do you build a company from 0 to 1? And then I started bringing in other mentors like Genevieve Weber or James Lee. Genevieve she just transitioned to actually investing, but she was the CEO, SVP of platform at Salesforce, who knows how to build SaaS. Salesforce is one of the premier SaaS companies on the planet. James Lee, his role was COO of SAP Ariba. Now he's an MD at Google, which he knows supply chain. He knows operations. He knows business. None other is Jesse Hertzberg. And Jesse was the CEO of Squarespace. He was the CEO of Livestream. Now he's an investor as well. But I have these people around me for a few reasons. Number one, it's to see around the corner. I only know so much because I've only experienced so much. The second one is to be there when I need support and I have questions that I have no idea. And lastly, I'm a solo founder today, which is a very, very lonely place, which I never realized how lonely just starting a company is. If I do it again, I'll probably have a co-founder, but they help me with the founder psyche, walking through things, making sure my morale's high, everything's good.
A quick follow-up to that. Totally tracking that the set of board members and advisors around you are incredible. curious if there were any veterans that have helped you throughout your process, whether that was at West Point, whether that was in the Army, whether it's now. And it might just be that there aren't any. And some other guests have actually said it's been like an Air Force Academy or naval person. But just curious if there's been any veteran.
The one that I would call out by default was Doug Pardo. So day one of Beast, him, you may know, Jeff and I met in the long line of showers waiting for like our first shower at West Point. And if anyone doesn't know what that's like, it's quite an experience, and especially one where it's a shocking experience. So we were right next to each other, and that's where we essentially met. We became best friends since Doug graduated in 2000. So naturally, like I was really close to Doug. He had multiple deployments. He was an Apache pilot. So he was like the de facto mentor for me at West Point when I was trying to figure out even like majors, career, and other things. That he was very helpful, even deployments. So he was that I went to time and time again. But that was a natural connection through Jeff. I'm very fortunate that Jeff has such an amazing brother. Both of them are unbelievable. But he was the one. I just go back to what I was mentioning before. I failed with those mentors and advisors. It's something I know how important they are today. I would advise anyone to get them and put them around them. People want to help you, and you don't realize that. And they're willing to help if you're willing to ask.
Awesome, Rodney. We'd like to transition into the next segment, which is called the sit rep or the situation report, essentially diving into what you're doing now in your post-military career. So for the listeners, would you give us a little bit of an overview of how you left the military, grad school, jobs you held until Anvyl, and now what you're building at Anvyl?
Leaving the military, I'll even start with that, was a very, very difficult decision. I loved it. Truly, I loved it. For me, it had to do with family life. It just wasn't going to work with that at the time, sadly. And I can go into that for days. I had limited control of what I could do to my, schedule, what the military was going to do. So that was a forcing function, not one I took lightly or really wanted to do. So leaving the military was extremely difficult. I left it kind of blindly. I was going to military kind of career conferences and fairs, which I'm sure a lot of people do. Again, if you have a mentor and other people, you can get in a job much faster, more efficiently. So another reason for a mentor. But I did that. But what I knew is I want to go to business school. I didn't have time because literally I was just redeploying, like not long when I was getting on the military. So I didn't have a lot of, clearly 15-month deployment, not a lot of time to study for GMAT. And so I was like, I want to go to business school. I need to study for GMAT. So my first job actually from a military fair was Booz Allen. What was amazing about that, didn't know consulting, but quickly knew I hated consulting. I would never do that again. Definitely government consulting. It's like soul sucking. Anyone listening to, if you do government consulting, I give you a lot of respect. It's just not for me. So I did that, studied for my GMAT. I went to Columbia for my MBA. And really there, like I was heavily focused on supply chain. I knew I liked it based on what I was studying. So at Columbia, I was like pushing to go to Apple because Apple's, I'll say hands down, the best supply chain company on the planet. To create that many products with that high of quality, with that few of defects and those tolerances, it's unbelievable. And I think the normal person on the street would not know the care and the dedication it goes to create something like that. So I wanted to go there. I started using people I knew, reaching out to networks, and I actually built the path from Columbia MBA into Apple. And I was like the first one to do that through the supply chain group. And then I went back to Apple, full-time supply chain. I was there 2.5, 3 years-ish. Great time. I was traveling every month to Japan and China, building products. What people don't realize is if anyone's in banking or thinking about banking, if you're at Apple supply chain, it's the exact same. You're never sleeping. You're constantly traveling, constantly working. In de facto, I'm in California and my suppliers are in Asia. Guess what? They're going to be up when I'm trying to go to bed and you have to get stuff done. So you're going to be speaking with them all night. But that was great. What then I started seeing, going back to the military time, Apple was amazing for learning, for developing, kind of getting the skill set, but you lacked autonomy. You lacked like the ability to build teams, like that environment in the military. I was truly missing it. So I jumped all the way down to a startup, and I went to like as early stage as I can find, which was Harry's Grooming. Which, if you don't know Harry's Grooming, it was started by Jeff and Andy. Jeff started Warby Parker, two of the premier direct-to-consumer companies, probably the OG of direct-to-consumer, some of the fastest growing ever. Unbelievable founders, unbelievable team. And I was like an early employee there. And then I got to do exactly what I wanted to. Put in all the process procedures, build a team, had tons of autonomy, worked with really smart, and talented, and exciting people. And then from that, I moved to Anvyl and I started my company.
On the move from Apple to Harry's, I'm really curious, like what drew you, one, to this startup or that specific startup as you were thinking about trying to have more autonomy and the opportunity to build teams?
So I was trying to index on a few things. So at the time, I was seeing what was different. And I actually had a few offers. One was, it's like an early engagement team at Google, where it's a small team where they were creating things like Project Loon, Google Fiber, before anyone on the market would see it. So it's like a little startup within Google just to launch products, like kind of their moonshot ideas. I was looking at that, but what my mentality and thought process was, I'm at this gas station. There's a gas station across the street. It's still a gas station. Why am I moving to a gas station? So then I started looking at smaller companies and looking at like the ones that are like early stage, some kind of funding, great leadership, location agnostic, really physical product agnostic, but I want to be in injection molding, some other verticals I didn't know so I could get back. I looked at a bunch, but Harry's just stood out. World-class investors, world-class founders, the people I met were unbelievable. The process took 8 months, actually. Crazy enough. I told them I'm not going there, which is a funny story. And then they came back a day later and they gave me an offer. It took that just to walk away. But my thought was to go with the best team, the best, I think, company that was there. And there's only a few I would have gone to, and that definitely was the top.
During your time there, I'm curious, what were, I guess, the biggest surprises for you, having built teams in the military, having been on large teams in the military and at Apple? What were the particular challenges that you ended up facing, if any, really, as you were working at Harry's?
I won't say challenges. I'll redirect this a little bit. What I will say, like when you're deployed, you don't know what's happening a lot of times. Like you will have a plan, but your plan changes often. That's exactly what a startup is. So we're going out and, you'll be creating some kind of product that you can't actually create. And you have to either adapt the product, adapt the supplier, whatever the situation is. That happens over and over again. That's something about you're bringing your adaptability into the business world. The second thing, if you're very regimented, you work really hard, you're going to be successful. A lot of the failures in what I see in startups, you get lazy people that are not regimented, they don't care. And I'm going to butcher this, but it was something in the military I heard early on by one of our NCOs, actually at West Point. It's like right time, right place, right shoes, right haircut. It's something like basic like that. That's all it takes to be successful, I think 90%. The other 10%, it's nuanced. But those are things I took with me, I guess. But there wasn't a lot of surprises, truthfully. It is hard, it's difficult, so that's life.
Yeah, Ben Fall actually had another similar set of phrasing. It's like, always be on time, always be prepared, and always look cool. So
True.
Definitely rings true. That's really interesting. Now, I'm really excited to hear more about what you're doing now with Anvyl. Lots of stuff. Tim and I have spent countless amounts of hours talking about startups and venture and investing, and you're kind of touching all of that now.
Yeah.
Would love to hear how you started the company and just a little bit of background on what the journey has been like until now and where you guys are at now.
So what I tell people about starting a company, I don't care about titles. I don't care, I'm the founder CEO. I don't care about that. I don't care about being the boss. Could care less about that. I care about problems. And what I started to see is that when I was at Apple, I had $300, $500 million to spend, and I couldn't fix a problem that I continued to see. When I went down to Harry's, it was the same thing where it's like the problem, I controlled, CapEx spend, direct spend, indirect spend, all this, and I couldn't buy a solution. And the problem was twofold, that the world of supply chain is extremely manual and it's very siloed. So if you look around the house, wherever you're at, walking on the street, somebody in my shoes is using an Excel spreadsheet, emails, and phone calls to figure out what's happening. That's supply chain. That's how it's been for 20, 30 years in the past. That is how it is today. And it's confusing. So I came into Anvyl with trying to fix a problem that I hated. And I want to be in supply chain for the next 20, 30 years. And I couldn't imagine being in supply chain next 20, 30 years without trying to fix a problem and at least taking a risk if I couldn't find a solution. So that's why.
And for those that maybe aren't as familiar with Anvyl, I mean, you've raised capital over the past few years. I think the Series A was in 2019. Recently, you raised the B in 2022, I think earlier this year. Where's Anvyl at now? What's the scope of the business? How big is the team? And what's that been like for you?
Yeah. So I guess even before, Anvyl is a procure-to-pay order management tool. So where we sit is a very first mile supply chain. So if you're ordering a good, you're producing a good, if you're going to ship it, you ship it. So end-to-end visibility. And there's 3 pillars: centralization, automation, and intelligence. So instead of guessing where your good is, hiring dozens of people to figure out where that is, and then praying that you're going to get it, we do that for you. So saving time, saving money. In total, we've raised 31 million. Again, I think we're very fortunate for that entire span. I can talk about the fundraising aspect, how bad I was, and probably still am. But 31 million, we have 50 people, over 50%, about 60% is tech. The others like go-to-market, sales, marketing, CS. And we work with 100 plus brands that you would know, like the Harrys of the world. And we're in 60 countries as suppliers. Last year, we did about $1.4 billion of goods through the platform. Q1, we did about 500 million. So this year, we're looking about anywhere from 3 to 5 billion probably through our platform. So it's a big universe that encompasses the globe.
Oh, that's awesome. How did it start? Like you mentioned that solo founder, which is probably not as typical today, unless it's a repeat founder, but curious just how it came to be, what sort of challenges, even if just a few you faced with fundraising, as you alluded to, but really interested to hear a bit about that, if you don't mind sharing.
I'll share how it started with the caveat is no one please do this. So hopefully you learn and live through me. So what happened is like over Christmas, this is back like 2016, early 2017-ish, I started creating a business plan thinking that you needed to do that. It was crazy how in-depth I went into it and how much time and energy. And what I realized is you only needed a pitch deck with 6 slides. So I wasted a lot of time and energy thinking about this problem and really only needed that. And then what I did with that, like eventually before the pitch deck, I started talking to people I knew, YouTube, people that like are alumni, that are investing, that are close to where I need to go, where you have the 1 degree of separation, to get a sense of what I needed to do to raise money, what I needed to do with capital. I wasted a lot of time in that world where my regret was I should have moved away quicker. The reason for that, I wasn't getting any traction. What I started seeing is, not to point fingers or name names, they didn't have a thesis around supply chain. They didn't know supply chain. They were being good helping me think about and talk, but they weren't being good in saying that they weren't going to give me any money. And that's really what I needed to start a company. So I started increasing the circle. And I started doing layer after layer after layer, talking to more and more people. I ended up talking about 200 people before I got my first check. The first check, I stumbled upon a few individuals. So you can call it friends and family, but they weren't friends and family. I grew up super poor, so I didn't have friends and family. No one was going to give me money to start a company. But I stumbled upon some seed angel investors, and they loved the idea. They loved the concept. Kevin Ryan actually is one of those. Shanlin Ma from Zola, Nobu from Zola. Kevin grilled me for this is a funny thing. This is a side story I'll share. So I meet Kevin at his office, and there's all this stuff printed out on his desk. There's like, I don't know, like my LinkedIn. There's some random West Point picture of me jumping over a high bar that like, I'm like, how did you even find that? Like crazy stuff. And he's just grilling me, like looking for some bad press, bad publicity, something bad about me potentially. And he just grilled me about me for literally 2 hours. That same night we went to dinner, and over like probably about 4 or 5 hours, we then started talking about the business. But that was like one of my first checks, and that was my first really large check. But funny story how blind and foolish I was to start it. And that's what I'm saying is don't do what I did. Go to people you know, quickly move on if people aren't going to give you money. Use your network really wisely. Get warm introductions. I was doing cold introductions to all these people that had no clue who I was. Of course, they want to give you the time of day. Don't do a business plan, do a very concise pitch deck or build out other things around that. So you have good fundamentals like a model or everything else. You don't need a full-blown business plan. But I started Anvyl foolishly. And I would say that's lack of mentorship and guidance.
I appreciate that. It's a fascinating story about Kevin too. So you've been through raising with the pitch deck, raised from top tier firms like First Round, Redpoint at the A, and then most recently, I think AliCorp. Now you have a set of mentors, as you mentioned, around the table in these investor seats or board seats. Curious kind of, as you think about that, what's most impactful for a mentor in this case, or a board member, or an advisor for someone like you or for a founder? Like, how does that relationship work?
Biggest thing that I think people need to realize about an advisor is they're there to support you, and you need to let them know where you need support. So a lot of people just go and just randomly talk. What I do for any of my, whether board members, my advisors, I send them an agenda ahead of time so they can think through it. I'm very focused exactly what I want to focus on, what I want to get out of it. So I manage them to be the best for me, and they're super helpful. I can just share, like, I was meeting Haley Barna is a GP at First Round Capital. She was a first institutional check, amazing partner. I actually this morning had a call with her, set up a call to talk through like some investment strategies, some mentorship things around my team, like giving them mentors. And it's unbelievable call. So it's like very focused, 30 minutes, but it's like I'm managing her to best suit like what I need. What I've seen in reverse, like I mentor some people in supply chain, they just randomly jump on calls without an agenda. So I'm like, great, I'll talk about anything, but like I feel like you're wasting your own time. It doesn't make sense, but that's advice I would give anyone. Be very regimented around agendas.
Rodney, what you've mentioned is also a reflection of being very intentional about meetings and just getting what you want out of meetings. Very interesting. Let's get into our next and third segment, the SOP, or Standard Operating Procedure. In this segment, we're going to talk about the personal routines, habits, and words to live by that have been instrumental to your success. What routines or habits did you have in the military at West Point that you still adhere to?
I am a crazy regimented human being, probably to a fault. And I love routines. In the military to today, like I wake up super early, I work out, I eat, breakfast, I go to work. And then at the end of the day, it's like the same routine over and over again. I've used that throughout my life. And I do it twofold. Number one is I think the routine is like great for my consistency. So I'm in the same mindset day in, day out. The second thing is I'm prepared, right? If I drop the workout, like for me, that's like the way to, alleviate stress. So it's like, if I miss that, that's like a killer for me. But those routines are critical. It's like daily routines. My day after that may change. There's a lot of things that I don't control, but the things I do control are like critical for me and my future and my success. What's changed though from the military is having a kid. What I realized is how selfish I was before. So now my routine is I make sure my last meeting is no later than 6:00. And then I'm with him like at least a minimum hour before he goes to bed. So I'll play with him, give him a bath, eat dinner, whatever it may be. But I make sure nobody schedules a meeting. I call that dark time. And we do this with Anvyl and my company. So that my dark time is early in the morning for working out, and then that time with my son. And I'll get on later, but I'm very, again, regimented with what I do and how I do it.
And then within those times that you're working, how would you say you're structuring it between sales or product or investor relations or HR?
So one of my mentors, Jesse, gave me this, and I've taken this to heart. So there's really a few things I have to do as a founder. Number one, hire great people. Number two, make sure I never run out of money. And number three, make sure I'm constantly building the business with sales. So there's other things to filter in there, but I guarantee any time of my day, I'm focused on one of those three things. And it could be, 90% I'm hiring one day, 10% I'm worrying about like funding. But those are the three things consistently I do and I focus on. And my team knows that, and I make that a habit.
Rodney, I have one more question on that time-wise. Like, especially within a startup, things are moving fast or slow, ups and downs for someone who's regimented. And I face this as well. Like, how do you, for lack of a better phrase, bob and weave with kind of things that are changing and so on for someone who is so regimented?
What you need to do is have a really pulse on what is happening with the business, whether it's the people side, the market side, any of your core fundamentals. And when you start seeing things out of whack, you need to adjust quickly. And you can't be regimented at that point. I'll give you an example. When we started Anvyl at 2017, we're a marketplace business. The thesis was if you can't find a great supplier, you can't make a physical product. So we wanted to be the Airbnb of supply chain. You can go on and find a supplier anywhere globally, work with them, and start product. What we started seeing about 2.5 years later, that model was broken. What we quickly went is over $1 million in revenue, and it stayed in this little stagnant world that is not venture backable, not a type of company I want to be a part of. And we could have continued to brute force that and be like, oh, you see some light. Like you go from 1 to 1.5 to 2 million, and you're like, great. But it's not doing the consistency and the repeatability you would want as a company. And from seeing that business not working, the numbers, the unit economics, we changed and we did a quick pivot. Sadly, I had to let people go that were focused on the marketplace, but the company was just going to fail and you're going to be a ghost of a company. It was going to fail eventually, but you see that. So you can't be regimented into like just willing something live, doing the same thing day in, day out. The numbers are telling you, the business is telling you what to do, and you need to quickly adapt, especially in startup life. Everyone's dying so slow and so fast as a startup. As soon as you get $1 in the bank, you have 25 cents out the door tomorrow. It depends on your burn, how quickly you go to zero. So you need to adapt as things are adapting. And you can't be like regimented. You have to be regimented and not being regimented when things are adjusting.
Rodney, since we graduated in 2004, time has flown by. In fact, it's close to our 20-year mark. I'm curious, looking forward, what's your goal for yourself, whether it be like 5 years or even 20 years from now? Clearly, family is a major component, but what other aspects and goals do you have for yourself?
Tim, you're taking away my family. That's the number one. That's the one I would lead with. I think the goals for me are simple. Number one is people. I want to build an amazing organization where its current employees at Anvyl or alumni go on and do amazing things. And I want to make sure we're doing that constantly. So in 5 years from now, they're starting companies that are, billion-dollar companies, or they're going on and becoming leaders at these startups or the Googles of the world. So number one, it's like people, developing world-class people and talent, both at Anvyl and beyond. The second is just creating a monster of a business. We took venture capital. What does that mean? It means either we're going to get acquired or we're going to IPO. And in that time frame, we better get acquired or IPO. So that's a major focus, and we have to do that. The alternative is death, and a lot of companies die. So there's 3 things we're looking at. You're going to die, you're going to IPO, or you're going to be acquired. And so those are like the 2 things. I think the most important thing, though, truthfully, is the people aspect. So even if we're acquired, even if we die, even if we IPO, it doesn't matter if we have bad people that we're pushing out of Anvyl. So people first and people always, truly.
Interesting. Reminds me what you just said, mission first, people always, straight from West Point in the military. Last question I have on this segment, and this is around military veteran entrepreneurs. You're the second 2004 guest. We had Socrates earlier, which was a fantastic podcast episode, which I listen to about once a quarter just to remind myself of the knowledge and insights there. And now you, and there's a number of military veteran entrepreneurs that have come across in the scene. What advice do you have, or separately, what do you think are the strengths or weaknesses that veteran entrepreneurs have?
I think the strengths are few-fold. In Socrates' company, everyone, if you don't know it, if you haven't listened to it, you should check out his company. It's amazing. And it shows you the diversity of what you can start and what you can do. Jane, right? Unbelievable. It's pretty cool. But number one, it's like bring it down. Whether or not you deployed, you have to be very adaptable in the military. You're working with people across the spectrum. A lot of people in business, typically you're working with like people that went to college, went to some kind of MBA program. In the military, you don't have that. Like you have, some people did, others don't, but you're adaptable to the situations you're in as far as people, location, anywhere else. So as the founder and or someone in a startup, you need to be extremely adaptable. The other is you just got to be very approachable and I would say driven. When I'm pitching investors, if they don't like me, they're not going to give me money. When I'm pitching someone to join Anvyl, if they don't like me, they're not going to come to the company. So you need to be approachable and show that you care about them. Those are I think the things that I would like always gravitate towards. Military, I think, does a good job on both.
Rodney, we're coming up against our time here a little bit. And the final segment or question that we like to end on relates to giving back. There's a lot of vets that are leaving the Army or staying in the military, but are approaching different phases of their careers. As you look back on your time as you were transitioning, and making various decisions to stay in or get out or go to the next startup. What advice would you give yourself or another veteran at that stage in their career as they're starting to make transitions?
If you can, don't be afraid of taking a risk. A lot of people go to the shiny object that they hear other people tell them about, whether it's in finance, consulting, or whatever it may be, the common path someone would take. Don't do that. Actually, go and attack what you want. If you have dreams about being the best marketer on the planet or starting a company or whatever it may be, do that. Take that risk. You can. You're young. You can make multiple mistakes. You could build things. It's crazy how I think a lot of the people I talk to or my classmates and peers, they hate their job, but they stay in that because they're afraid to take a risk. Number two, I'd just talk to other people constantly. I'd expand your network as fast and as rapidly as possible so you know what's happening. I mentioned how clueless I was going into West Point. I mentioned how clueless I was going into the business world. If I talked to two people, they would tell me how West Point is and how the business world is. I was a fool not to reach out to people. So that's the advice. And I mean, twofold, I'm always happy to get back. If anyone's thinking about starting a company, I'll go back and tell them all the mistakes I made. I'll try to help them with introductions. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they're successful. And instead of taking 6 months that I took, they can hopefully take a week.
Amazing. That's sadly all the time we have. I feel like we could have gone for a few more hours, but Rodney, thanks so much for making time for these insights. I know Tim and I have really enjoyed this and are looking forward to sharing it with listeners.
Thanks. This was fun.
On Point is a production of the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.